Let's start with Vik Kachoria. Vik, if you want to come up, he's the president and CEO of Spike Aerospace, based in Boston. And Vik is going to talk us through his concept for a supersonic future. Vik.
Jack, thank you. Thank you very much. This is a really amazing conference where we're talking about ideas and visions for having a more prosperous, peaceful future, a tolerant future full of education and opportunity. So if we think of what tolerance means, it means this audience here is an elite audience of very well-educated, well-traveled folks that have come to this region to experience it, to bring their ideas and share knowledge and share cultures, cultural exchange. We're tolerant of each other, of race, religion, culture, political ideology. Part of that experience is a physical experience, being able to come here and experience it firsthand. I've traveled extensively, and I imagine most here. I have friends in Boston, very well educated, but they've never traveled outside of Boston, New York, maybe, somewhere else in the US. They travel to Europe every now and then. It's a 6-hour trip. It's doable, it's manageable, it just takes time to do that. Coming to Abu Dhabi, that's 12 hours, 14 hours. That's a long trip. Getting to Asia can be 18 to 20 hours. India is 24 hours. It's very difficult for Americans to go to another region and experience it personally. And I think that's where tolerance comes from. Education is great. We get to read about it, see movies, talk to people, that's great. But we need to be there personally to experience those folks and to realize they're just like you and me. And that's what I think transportation is about. It's about the opportunity to get goods and services to those people, but for us to connect with others around the globe. So it's a combination of institutes like this, education, bringing ideas and people together, but also for us to go out to those regions and have our neighbors go somewhere. Some of my neighbors have never been to Abu Dhabi or Dubai, have no interest, and they have a view of this region that's a little less tolerant than we would like. So that's what transportation, as Amir just talked about, it's a human right. It needs to be. So if we look at the per capita, the standard of living over the centuries, this century on the left actually goes out to 3000 BC. The graph has been done. I chopped it off a little bit. It was a steady standard of living for 3,000 years. There was camels, there's walking, sail ships, but it wasn't until the first steamship and the first railroad in the late 1700s, early 1800s that enabled you to get, in that case, England, and then across the Atlantic reliably, safely, faster. It allowed you to get the goods and services to the people that wanted to experience it. It created opportunity. People could now go from Europe to the US and start going over time from Europe over to Asia and experiencing all that the countries and cultures had to offer. And that continues when you had the first car and then you had the first plane. It starts off across the United States or across Europe, across this region, and then eventually the first jet takes you across the world. What happens when you shrink that time even further? Our trip from New York or Boston to here, instead of being 12 hours, is 6 hours. Now it becomes a doable trip. Not comfortable, but it's 6 hours. We can do that. We do that all the time. And that means a lot more people can come to this region and experience it firsthand. This region can go to the US and experience that. The Europeans can come here or can go to Hong Kong. That's a phenomenal experience that I would love to be able to share with the world. And for both business, of course, every business travelers will want to do that for their opportunities and investment. But for individuals, for cultures, for friends and family to connect. So all of that is part of a vision to think of what the future is going to look like. This is Abu Dhabi in 1972, the Hilton Hotel. I came to this region on my way from New York City to Karachi to visit family there. I stopped here for a refueling stop. I didn't take this picture, but this is something grabbed from the internet. This is what the region looked like. It's a desert, it's a wasteland. As a 9-year-old boy, I couldn't figure out why I was here. But I didn't have the vision the leaders in this region did. This is Abu Dhabi. This is what that desert became in 50 years. That's pretty phenomenal. World-class city, healthcare, education, finance, technology. This is a place that people are coming to express their ideas, to meet others, to move the world forward. I think that's tremendously exciting to see. And I'm looking forward to the next 50 years here. On the other hand, aircraft, and as one of the commenters talked about, is what happened to do with the Moore's Law in technology? Why haven't we moved that forward? Why are we still flying planes? 50 years ago, Gulfstream looked like this. The 747, I could show you a picture of that too. And 50 years later, this is a business jet, Gulfstream aircraft, that looks pretty identical. It certainly took a lot of engineering resources to advance it, but not a whole lot of visionary. It flies at the same speed, has a little bit longer range, but what they did for vision is provide lay flat beds and charge you a lot more, 10 times more, right? And it gets you there at the same time as economy flights or a private jet or whatever you're gonna fly. You get the privilege to pay more so you can lay flat, all right, that's nice, but you get there at the same time. So what do we rethink that as we've been talking about, whether we have Hyperloop or air taxis or autonomous cars, in our case, supersonic aircraft. What do we think about it? What is the next generation of aircraft that's efficient, that's sustainable, safe, clean, friendly to the environment, and saves time in connecting you from Abu Dhabi to Boston, New York, to Hong Kong, to anywhere you want to go? What does that look like? And I think it's tremendously exciting, and our vision of it is for zero carbon supersonic flight. We can't do this tomorrow. Our first aircraft will not be zero carbon, but it is highly efficient. The engines we're using, the technology you're using, really minimizes the fuel burn. But what's really important in supersonic flight, as we saw from the Concorde days, that created a loud sonic boom. The engines on the runway were incredibly loud, annoyed people on the ground and the communities that they operated in. It wasn't very efficient. When the Concorde started flying, gas was 25 cents a gallon, 1960s. When they retired it, gasoline was $4.50 a gallon. So it was no longer economical to fly the same aircraft on the engines designed for 25 cents a gallon. Using new technology and new engines and accounting for that gasoline price in the future as we go forward, this aircraft is going to be just a slight premium over business class seats. It's going to get passengers to destinations faster. It's also going to be environmentally friendly. That's important. Right now, there's 25,000 aircraft, commercial airliners flying. There's going to be 50,000 in 20 years. A lot of aircraft, a lot of fuel burn, a lot of emissions. So we need to recognize that. There's also 4 billion passengers that flew last year. By 2025, there'll be 5 billion. In 2030, there'll be 6 billion, 6.5 billion. It's a lot of passengers that want to travel and see the world and experience it. This is our range map from, imagine, Abu Dhabi to anywhere in these 4 regions, Europe, Africa, Asia, in less than 4 hours. That's pretty incredible. It's a day trip to London and back. You can go there for a business meeting and come back in the afternoon. You can go shopping in Hong Kong and back in the afternoon. Imagine what that has to do, what that will do for tolerance and cultural acceptance of connection. Our aircraft, compared to our competitors, is designed specifically to be a low sonic boom aircraft. We know that 80% of flight routes are over land, from Dubai to Asia to Europe, and you're going to be flying over populations. You got migratory birds, you got migratory animals. They're also going to be impacted by sonic booms. You got people that don't want to hear sonic booms, loud engine noises all the time. So you have to ensure that it's low sonic boom, sustainable and comfortable. If you can connect this part of the region, these 4 regions, in half the time, that's phenomenal. It keeps going back to the mention. The vision, while you're advancing aircraft, you can do more things. Inside of an aircraft, if you're flying a 747 or 737, the noise level inside the aircraft constantly is 80 dB. That's pretty loud noise level to be hearing for 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. It's tiring, it's exhausting. You can reduce that noise and have it almost silent, almost like you would have in your bedroom, around 40 to 50 dB. And the way we're doing that is removing the windows on both sides of the fuselage. Those small portal windows that don't line up with your seats anyway. And if it's sun, you close your shades, or if you're flying over water or at nighttime, you're closing your shade anyway. So let's remove those windows, insulate both walls of the fuselage, and reduce the noise that comes in, the engine noise, the wind noise, and replace with digital screens. Then you can have cameras that provide videos on those screens. You can have maps, movies, presentations, anything you want to do on this. It provides incredible benefit for the aircraft safety, structure, noise, and passenger experience. Disruptive technology always happens. We were talking about this a moment ago, Moore's Law. It's always new innovators are reaching for a small niche of the market. Tesla, not GM. Why did Tesla do an electric car? Look, batteries and electric motors and tires have been around for 100 years. But Tesla put the package together and developed an incredible car that GM still hasn't done. They will. SpaceX, and the same thing, Spike. Gulfstream is focused on their market. They have an incredible aircraft. I've flown on it many times. But they have a market that they need to support and sustain, legacy aircraft. We're able to find a niche, a small area that's interested in and demands faster transport to wherever they need to go. We're officially out of time. If I take a second longer, supersonic transport is fantastic for wealth, obviously, for business. It's going to be incredible to manage your suppliers, your customers, your contact. We're looking at investment opportunity. It's fantastic for entertainment, for experiencing, for culture. It's also fantastic for investors, for investment opportunities. Slums, shanty towns, townships like this in Cape Town, or in Indonesia, in Bangladesh, in South America, they exist all over. And part of the reason is as I said, for me to get to Africa, it's 24 hours. If I'm an investor and I need to go there every month, I can't do 24 hours both ways, 48 hours. That's an extensive trip. We can cut that down. Europeans, Middle Easterns, and others can reach this region and develop infrastructure. It's just sad to see pictures like this. So this is where I started, as I might have said, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, in a desert village in India. I left on a camel and took a flight to London. My world changed dramatically. It was the transportation that changed my world. Thank you.
Have a seat. Vik, thank you. We're talking about this like it's a revolutionary new idea, but none of us have actually mentioned the Concorde word yet.
Right.
Supersonic flight is an idea that has been around for decades. Some people in this room have flown supersonically, so either they're fighter pilots or they've been on Concorde, and Concorde didn't succeed. So why will you?
Now, it's a good question. You're right. Supersonic flight has been around since 1949. Some of the early jets, they were pushing the envelope, and they did. And the Concorde flew supersonic because they recognized that there was a need and a demand of passengers getting across the Atlantic that much faster. So the Concorde was designed in the 1960s on paper and slide rules. I used a slide rule. That's how I did my early physics. Fortunately, I can use calculators and computers now. And we can do a lot more with computers and technology that we have now. Concorde, as I said, was designed in an era where gasoline was 25 cents a gallon. It was built with engines built in the 1950s, old Olympus military engines, 4 of them. They weren't fuel efficient. They weren't trying to be fuel efficient. They weren't trying to reduce the sonic boom. They had an aircraft that was ahead of its time, absolutely gorgeous. And I've been on it, didn't fly on it, but inside the cabin. I think the world has changed from that era where it was Europe and the US as the primary markets, and flying across the Atlantic was fine. But because of the sonic boom, they couldn't fly over Europe and Asia, and that's a critical market. That's what happened.
So let's talk through some of that engineering then. So tell us about the sonic boom and maybe sort of explain exactly what that is. Why is this supersonic, this speed of sound, why is that a literal and figurative barrier when it comes to flight? And how do you get around that?
So if you think about a boat in water, we've all been on boats, and you hit the front of the water and the waves in the back, it creates a wake. And that happens on any aircraft that you have. But what happens there is the boat's going slow enough, the water is compressible enough, it can flow behind you and just create waves behind you. But in supersonic aircraft, the water can't get out of the way, air in this case. It can't get out of the way fast enough. The air molecules are hitting the front of the plane, they're hitting the wing, they're bumping into each other, creating a huge shock wave. And that propagates down to the ground, creates that thunderclap that we remember the Concorde doing. And that's what's creating the shock wave. Over the 60 years, with all electronic engineering, digital engineering tools we have now, we can optimize that plane form. When the Concorde was designed, they tested 10 different designs. That's all the math they had the ability to do and all the calculations they had to do. Now we can test 1,000 designs in about maybe a week. We can test 1,000 designs in a week for $100,000. It's pretty amazing what we can do very quickly with digital engineering. And that's the acceleration that we still have. So the acceleration we've seen in other fields in telecom and cell phones and computers, we're going to start seeing in aviation too. It's just reaching that market. It's much more sophisticated, much more complex than a cell phone. You got lives at stake, you got altitudes, you got fuel and engines. So it just takes a little longer. Patience.
So just to drill down to that, the problem with that boom is that it was just so loud that people did not want to live on the flight path. for Concorde whatsoever, which meant that
that's right.
it just wasn't allowed to fly over land, basically.
Exactly. It was banned over any country, flying over to Europe. They had hundreds of orders for it, but as soon as they started hearing the bans, all the orders were canceled. They built a total of 16 jets, 16 flying aircraft.
So can you tell us what technology innovations you have been able to do to reduce that boom? Because it's not just you, other people are working on this. NASA's working on low boom demonstration for supersonic flight. So what's changed? I mean, the laws of physics are still the same.
Laws of physics are still the same, and they're kind of a pain in the neck. So, it'd be nice to get around that. If we could, we'd just do a beam me up device. People are always asking me to do beam me up, skip the whole supersonic thing. But laws of physics, we have to abide by that. So, other competitors are working on it, but they're not focused on the low boom. They focus on high boom aircraft. It's called high boom. It would be strictly over the Atlantic, primarily European to U.S. markets. I think, as I showed on the slide, that most of the market's going to be from Europe to Middle East to Asia. As we talk to customers, they want to fly not from Shanghai to LA, they want to fly from Shanghai to Paris. They want to go shopping, they want to come to Dubai, they want to go to London for business. So the sonic boom is shaped by the shape of the aircraft, by the length of the aircraft, the weight of the aircraft. And that's why we picked 18 passengers. We picked a speed of Mach 1.6 that is slow enough, we can manage that sonic boom. It's thin enough, small enough aircraft. It's not like a Concorde, 100 passengers, 600,000 pounds. Ours is just over 100,000 pounds. So it's a much smaller aircraft, and that's why the sonic boom is reduced so much, along with the engineering that goes into it.
And another bullet point that I was glad to see that you addressed was emissions, because if you're talking about increasing the number of flights, making flight more available to more people, obviously that is going to become an issue. I think your presentation said some sort of hybrid technology you were looking at. Can you tell us a little more about that?
I can't say too much. So we've been working with 2 engine manufacturers. One of them has a very interesting engine technology and a roadmap to lead us to full fuel cell technology in the nearish future. Probably at least 20 years out still, but in the intervening years, we can start using hybrid technology in other aspects of the aircraft, lighting, other areas I can't talk about right now. One thing that we are doing, for instance, de-icing a plane. In this region, less of an issue. Certainly in the northern hemisphere, further north, it becomes a serious issue where you spray thousands of tons of glycol onto the leading edge of the wing to prevent it from icing so that you have the lift that you need to take off. That's a chemical hazard, it's an environmental hazard, so you want to eliminate that. Or you use electric de-icing, and that's another energy consumption. So there's a company we're working with, we've been doing some testing on using this new spray they've developed to coat the front leading edge. It's a permanent spray, coats the leading edge of the plane so it doesn't ice up. And that's phenomenal if you can get rid of the glycol, if you can get rid of these chemical sprays, electric. So the environment is very important.
We'll open this up for questions in just a sec, because I'm sure people have a lot. I just have one more for you about, if you're trying to push through this sort of relatively radical redesign of an aircraft, you've got to get through all these certification stages. Is that something that you're having to start addressing now? And how difficult will that be, to get through things like the FAA in the US in order to be able to fly a plane like this?
We've already started discussions with the FAA. They've been very interested in what we're doing and managing, especially the windowless cabin, sonic boom. But they've already certified business jets. They've done that for decades now, the Gulfstream. And our aircraft, in many ways, is similar to the Gulfstream. It's faster. That's one of the key differences. The avionics we're using, the engines are certified, so the major components are certified. In some ways, we're not doing anything really radical. We're just applying technology in a slightly different way, configuration. We will need to certify the plane for supersonic flight. We have to consider oceanic flights and the impact of that, the safety considerations there. So there's certainly a lot of testing that'll go into this before we get certified.
But do you find regulators are willing to work with you? Are they open to new designs?
Absolutely, yeah. We've been talking to them, ongoing discussions, and some of the considerations. We got 2 program managers on our team that are helping us navigate the path and be aware of some of the challenges that we're going to face.